Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in Freshman English. We turn now on our hymnals for Unit 6 to 1040. Please note at the lower left corner of that page it says 1040A, 1040B, 1040C, 1040D, E, and F. Do you see that? These are the pages now that we want to introduce ourselves to as we are preparing to read the Odyssey. Just read along with me and let's see how much information, new information, we can gain right before we begin our study of the Troy Tale, the Iliad, and the Odyssey, and we'll even make references to Virgil's Aeneid as well. Preparing to read the Odyssey. Read with me on page 1048. Homer's epic poems celebrate the legendary heroes and heritage of a great culture. We'll begin with historical background. Ancient Greece. They'll give you a couple of pictures here. The world of ancient Greece included the Greek mainland, dipping down from continental Europe and Western Asia Minor and Asia, the Asian part of present-day Turkey. It also included hundreds of islands in the Aegean Sea, the arm of the Mediterranean Sea between mainland Greece and Asia Minor, and in the Ionian Sea, the arm of the Mediterranean to the west of mainland Greece. Odysseus, the legendary hero of Homer's Odyssey, was said to be the ruler of Ithaca, one of the western islands. By the way, if you look directly across the page to 1040b, you'll see your little map there, right? So you can see Athens, you can see Mycenae, you can see Sparta, you can see Olympia, where we get our term for the Olympics, right? And do you see Ithaca there? So in other words, it will be on the western coast there where the Ionian Sea is. That gives you some kind of sense of the part of the world that we'll be looking at. Our next heading has to do with the Mycenaeans as well as the Mycenaeans. Nearly 1,000 years before Odysseus would have lived, Greek culture, civilization, rose to greatness on Crete, another island south of the mainland. By about 2000 BC, a sophisticated society called the Mycenaean civilization had developed on Crete. Judging by the archaeological evidence, the Mycenaeans produced elegant stone palaces and fine carvings and metalwork. They also developed a writing system preserved on a few hundred of the clay tablets on which they wrote. Scholars call that writing system Linear A and have yet to decipher it. For several centuries, Minoan culture dominated the Greek world. Then, in about 1450 BC, you want to write that date down, 1450 BC, it collapsed rather suddenly, perhaps due to earthquakes and invasion. With the weakening of Minoan culture, the Mycenaeans became the dominant force in the Greek world. Originating on mainland Greece, the Mycenaeans had swept south into Crete, strongly influenced by Minoan culture, civilization. The Mycenaeans had a palace culture and economy based on trade, a writing system that mostly used clay tablets. Evidence of their writing is found in Knossos and Chaeronea on Crete, as well as in Mycenae, Pylos, Thebes, three of their mainland strongholds. Because the Mycenaeans spoke an archaic or older form of Greek, scholars have been able to decipher their writing known as Linear B. It was used primarily to keep palace records and the like. By the way, they have Sir Arthur Evans, the British archaeologist, working extensively on Crete. You got a picture there. You've also got a photograph there of some dolphins. Do you see that? All right, let's go to 1040b, legendary conflicts. The writing and archaeological remains suggest early cities with large central palaces and thick protective walls, each ruled by a wanax, or king. Others in society included priests, slaves, workers in trades or crafts, administrative officials, and warrior class. The Mycenaeans wore armor in battle, in which they engaged with apparent frequency. Their warfare with Troy, if you look straight up, do you see it on the map? See Troy up there, right? Their warfare with Troy on the northwest coast of Asia Minor has become one of the most famous military ventures of all time, the Trojan War. We want to write that term down, the Trojan War. If there really was a King Odysseus, he would have been a key player in that conflict. Scholars date, here we go, this is huge. Scholars date the Trojan War to somewhere around 1200 BC, before the Common Era. So 1200 years before Christ is born is roughly the time of the Trojan War. Shortly thereafter, Mycenaean civilization collapsed as the Greek world fell into chaos confusion. For some 300 years, writing seems to have disappeared in what is often called the Greek Dark Ages. You want to write that term down, the Greek Dark Ages, when for 300 years, it looks like all kinds of writing was lost. Then, in about 850 BC, Greece began emerging from this darkness, spurred by flourishing trade throughout the Mediterranean region. Along with the economic boom came a resurgence of the arts and learning that peaked with the epic poems of Homer. These poems, the Iliad, you want to write that down, the Odyssey, that's the one that we'll be paying attention to, chronicle the Trojan War and the subsequent adventures of the hero Odysseus. The rise of city-states, let's get this one in our notes. After Homer's time, Greek civilization grew more organized, sophisticated, smaller communities organized as city-states, cities that function independently as countries do. Among them were Sparta, that's a big one, you want to write that down, known for its military prowess, and Athens, you want to write that name down, the birthplace of democracy, that's huge for us, right? Though rivalries sometimes led to warfare among city-states, the Greeks still recognized their common heritage as Hellenes, as they by then usually call themselves. They coordinated efforts to fight common enemies, such as the Persians. They participated in the Olympic Games, which records indicate began in 776 BC. So write that down. The thing we know as the Olympics began in 776 BCE. Together, too, they saw the works of Homer as pillars of their heritage, two great epics that celebrated their common past and its heroes. Again, in the freshman year, what we do is we tell you the story that we call the Troy Tale, T-A-L-E, that will include stories that are pre-Iliad, stories that are Iliad, stories that are Odyssey, and stories that are post-Iliad, like the Odyssey as well as Virgil's Aeneid and other stories. All right, let's go now to Greek mythology and customs, all right? We use Edith Hamilton's mythology and a study of Edith Hamilton's mythology often to kind of get us ready for this idea of Greek mythology. All aspects of Greek culture, by the way, I'm on 1040C, all aspects of Greek culture reflected belief in the Olympian gods. Ancient Greek religion was based on a belief in many gods. That's what we call polytheistic, yes? Zeus was king of the gods, Hera his beautiful and powerful wife. Other gods and goddesses were associated with different aspects of nature or human behavior. The most important ones were said to dwell on Mount Olympus, the tallest mountain in Greece, where Zeus sat on a throne of gold. These Olympians, however, were not the first gods. Let's get to our next heading. The Titans are overthrown. Some of you have heard this term, Titans, but you didn't know exactly what it meant. The early poet Hesiod wrote a mythic account of the origin of the gods in Theogony, a work of the Greeks, revered almost as much as Homer's epics. According to that origination myth, first there was chaos, a dark, empty void. Out of chaos came the earth, personified as the goddess Gaia. The earth generated the skies, personified as the god Uranus, who, with Gaia, produced the giant gods known as Titans. Kronos, the chief Titan, ruled the universe until he was displaced by his three sons, who split the universe among them. Zeus, the most powerful of these sons, became ruler of the heavens. His brother, Poseidon, became ruler of the seas. I'm hoping that you're getting these in your notes. The third brother, Hades, became ruler of the underworld, a dark region, also called Hades, which was inhabited by shades of the dead. So let's put it in our notes. Zeus defeats his father, Kronos, and takes over the world. He and his two brothers divide up the world, Zeus taking care of the skies, right, and you could argue the earth itself, Poseidon taking care of the ocean, and Hades taking care of what was referred to as the underworld, okay? That is to say, the place of the dead. Now, you mustn't think of this, we'll say this later in our study of the Troy Tale and the Odyssey, you mustn't think of Hades as hell. That's a different concept. By the time we get to Dante in 1300 Common Era and his trip through the underworld in his famous Divine Comedy, and he calls it the Inferno or hell, that's a different understanding, and yet obviously born from, in large measure, this idea. The Greek gods were powerful, but they were not all powerful. Even Zeus had to bow to fate. Write that down. So fate seems in these epics to be even greater at times than the gods. The gods displayed many human qualities. This is what we call anthropomorphism, the idea that the gods are in the form or morph of humans, anthrop. The gods displayed many human qualities and were often vengeful and quarrelsome. They were also quick to slap down human beings guilty of hubris, excessive pride. You want to get that in your notes. Hubris, excessive pride. If you think too highly of yourself in Greek mythology, often the gods will jack you, right? To appease the gods, human beings perform sacrifices which often involve the killing of animals, or sometimes, as we'll see in the story of the Troy Tale, even the killing of a human being, right? We'll think of Agamemnon's sacrifice of Iphigenia, his daughter. In the Odyssey, Odysseus makes several sacrifices to plead for divine aid on his journey home. Our next heading is celebrating the gods. The Greeks worshipped the gods in temples dedicated to many gods, or just one. The Parthenon in Athens, for instance, was a temple dedicated to the goddess Athena, which is why, of course, we call that city Athens. The Greeks also celebrated their gods at Greek festivals, such as the Olympic Games, which were dedicated to Zeus. The Greeks believed in prophecy, which they associated with the god Apollo. Put that in your notes. Apollo, often associated with prophecy. In the Odyssey, Odysseus journeys all the way to the underworld to consult the blind prophet Tiresias, who continues to have the gift of prophecy even though he has died. Write that name down. That's a big one. Tiresias, an important seer, prophet in a lot of our stories. We're going to see him a lot. The Greeks also believed in myths, stories about gods and heroes that they used to explain the world around them. Let's go ahead and put that word in our notes. Myth is simply the quest or the stories that try to explain the unexplainable. The Iliad, the Odyssey drew on these myths. However, for future generations of ancient Greeks, Homer's two epics, like Hesiod's Theogony, took on the aura of myths themselves. 1040D is an important page for us, okay? And it's one that even I might recommend to you that you want to reproduce in some way, all right? Here we will have the major gods in Greek mythology. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon. Notice Zeus, the king of the gods, Hera, his wife, Poseidon, the god of the sea, Hades, as we've already said, god of the underworld. By the way, notice the Roman names. These are huge. We'll see this as well in our study in Edith Hamilton's Mythology, opening chapter. Notice that Zeus's Roman name is Jupiter, Hera's Roman name is Juno, Hades' Roman name is Pluto. These will be important names for us in the Roman when we study in our senior year Virgil's Aeneid, okay? Aphrodite is the goddess of love and beauty. Her Roman name is Venus. Ares, the god of war, his Roman name is Mars. Some of you will say, why'd they name them after planets? No. The planets were named after these gods and goddesses, okay? Apollo, as we've already said, is the god of prophecy and music. He's also called Phoebus, and his Roman name is also Apollo. Artemis is the goddess of the hunt and the moon. Boy, oh boy, Artemis can be a very scary goddess. She is the one that is ultimately responsible for Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter Iphigenia. And her Roman name is Diana. Athena is the goddess of wisdom, skills, war. Her Roman name is Minerva. Hephaestus is the god of fire and metalwork. And for those of you who are Star Trek fans, you know all about the Roman name is Vulcan. Hermes is the god of commerce and cunning. He is also the messenger god, and his Roman name is also Mercury. Sometimes the Romans kept the name of the Greek gods. Other times they invented a name of their own. Demeter is the goddess of the harvest, and the Roman name for her is Ceres. Dionysius is the god of wine and revelry, partying, the theater, and all of that, also called Bacchus. The Roman was again Dionysius or Bacchus. Hestia is the goddess of the home and the hearth, and her Roman name is Vesta. Helios is the sun god, and the Roman name is simply Sol. Uranus is the sky god, supplemented by his son Kronos. The Roman, of course, is Uranus as well. Gaia is the earth goddess, as we've already said, the mother of the Titans and the Cyclopses, and the Roman name is Telis or Terra. Kronos is the Titan who ruled the universe before his son Zeus dethroned him, and the Roman name is Saturn. Okay? Rhea is the wife of Kronos and the mother of Zeus, and her Roman name is Sibyl, or Sibyl. Cyclopses are any one of three titans who forged thunderbolts for Zeus. The plural is Cyclopses. The Fates are the three goddesses, and you can see them there as well. They wove the threads of each person's life. Cleotho spun the thread. Lachesis measured out the amount of thread, and then Atrophes snipped the thread. The Muses, the 9 goddesses who presided over the arts and sciences, including Calliope, the muse of epic poetry. By the way, in your senior year, when we study together Milton's Paradise Lost, so many of these gods and goddesses' names will come back one more time. Let's finish on 1040 E and F now, introducing you to Homer, the epic poet. The poems attributed to Homer still influence literature and culture today. Homer is the legendary poet credited with writing the Iliad and the Odyssey. These epics, known for their sweeping scope, gripping stories, and vivid style, having captured readers' imaginations for almost 3,000 years. Our first question: Was there really a Homer? No one can prove his existence with any certainty, for no authentic record of Homer's life exists. Tradition has it that he was born in Ionia, in Western Asia Minor, perhaps on the island of Chios, and that he was blind. Put that in your notes. Homer is often referenced as being blind. The location is not unreasonable, but Ionia was a center of poetry and learning, where Eastern and Western cultures met and new intellectual currents were born. Descriptions of Asia Minor in the Iliad show in-depth knowledge of the landscape. Moreover, both the Iliad and the Odyssey contain plot elements found in the world's first known epic, Gilgamesh. I mentioned that earlier in a conversation with the Ramayana, which by Homer's era had traveled from Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, to become familiar in Asia Minor. For example, the hero Gilgamesh visits the underworld. Just like the hero of the Odyssey, he also has a very good friend who is killed, just like Achilles has in the Iliad, as I mentioned. Most efforts to date Homer's life place him somewhere, write this in your notes, between 850 and 750 BC. As a Greek oral poet, it's unlikely he lived much later, for by then writing had been reintroduced to Greek culture. The details in Homer's epics make clear that the poems were orally composed and that the Iliad was written first and probably some years before the Odyssey. The two epics differ in style. The Iliad is a single, long, highly dramatic narrative, while the Odyssey is episodic and reads more like an adventure novel than a drama. For these reasons, some scholars even speculate that the epics were composed by two different poets. Inspiring poems, the next heading. Whatever the truth about Homer may be, no one disputes the quality of the two epics with which he is credited. The ancient Greeks revered means respected, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They recited the poems at religious festivals, had children memorize them in school. All the Greek writers and philosophers who came after Homer drew on the two epics. Their influence spread to Rome and beyond, and they became foundational works of Western literature. Even in modern times, great works from James Joyce's Ulysses, a text that we will talk about in our senior year, to Derek Walcott's Honors have been directly inspired by Homer's verse. And when you're a senior, we'll do Tennyson's Ulysses as well to talk about the influence. 1040F to finish, the epic form. This is huge, get it in your notes. The epic is a long narrative poem that relates important events in the history or folklore of the culture that produced it. Its central character, or put this in your notes, epic hero, is a larger-than-life figure who embodies traits that the culture values. Typical among those characteristics are, here we go, physical strength, bravery, high birth, fame, and effective skills as a leader and in battle. We might add to that as well, often a good talker, somebody who's linguistically competent. The Iliad and the Odyssey influenced virtually all the great Western epics that followed them, from the Aeneid, the great epic of ancient Rome. I mentioned several of these titles in my lectures. Here you have spellings for them now. The great Roman epic, the Aeneid, which tells of the story of Aeneas, the great hero. To Beowulf, the foundational epic of Old English. From the Divine Comedy, the masterful epic by the Italian poet Dante, to Paradise Lost, the brilliant epic by Britain's John Milton, all had Homer's epics as models. That's an important list. I hope that list is in your notes. And we'll consider you well-read by the time you graduate from high school in 4 years if you know something about each one of those stories. Our curriculum at World in High School is intended to at least help you to know something about each one of those. Literary devices in Homer's epics are often imitated in these later works, even though many of the later works were not orally composed. Influential literary devices found in Homer's epics include the following. These are huge. You want to make sure these bullet points of 1040F are in your notes. The first one, opening invocation to the muse. The speaker of the poem asks the muse for inspiration. Sing, O goddess of the rage of Achilles, the opening lines of the Iliad, or of arms and the man I sing, the opening lines of Virgil's Aeneid. Starting the story in medias res. You want to make sure that term is written in your notes. In medias res is simply Latin for in the middle of things. Beginning after the invocation with action instead of background information helps capture audience attention. That's huge. So we'll start right away in the middle of the action. The next one is lofty style. By this we mean elegant language stresses the nobility of the subject. Objective tone. By keeping an emotional distance, the poet focuses attention on the story. Meter, or a fixed rhythmic pattern. A strong meter helps the oral poet remember the lines. In the original Greek, the Odyssey uses hexameter, or 6 beats to a line, which helps create a fast pace. The epithet, a characterization phrase for a person, place, or thing. Reoccurring epithets are easy to remember and can help fill out the meter. Some examples of Homer's epithets include rosy-fingered Dawn and the son of Laertes for Odysseus. Finally, the epic simile. This is huge. Get this one in your notes. A long comparison over many lines. Such similes were another way to fill out the meter and aid the poet's memory. You also have a little bit about the island of Ionia, Homer's possible birthplace, and a box right above it. Ionia, from where Homer may have come, was on the west coast of Asia Minor. We saw that when we looked at that map. The Ionian Sea, where Odysseus' island of Ithaca lies, is off the west coast of Greece. The duplicated names are likely not no coincidence. Greek speakers from Ionia probably migrated to the west of Greece and brought the name with them, just as British settlers often brought British place names to America, right? Okay, guys, so that's our introduction. We now turn, if you'll flip the page, we now turn to get ready for our study of the Odyssey, part 1, as they will call it. Now, let's say really quickly 3 things about our study of the Odyssey now going forward. 1, we're not reading the entire Odyssey. Notice it says part 1, but what we mean by part 1 is just a series of stories from the 24 books of the Odyssey. Okay? You can read the entire Odyssey on your own, and you'll study it with me in your senior year if you wish. But right now, we're just going to introduce it to you. Okay? So that's the first thing we want to say. Number 2, our story of the Odyssey and our study of the Odyssey has to assume some knowledge that we'll call prior knowledge, that we will call together, borrowing from Edith Hamilton's classic text, Mythology, the Troy Tale, T-A-L-E, the Troy story. Troy, just the city where the Great War was fought. All right?